Amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
good
I would want
morning,
it now.
everyone. And thank you. I will let our chair, Councillor Second, do the welcome and introductions in just a moment. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Craig Evans. I'm the Governance Services Officer here at the West Midlands Combined Authority. And just a couple of quick housekeeping updates for those of us in the meeting room this morning. Just to say that I've checked the sound from one end of the room to the other, and it works perfectly. So although we've got microphones on desks, there is no need to use them. And then secondly, there is going to be a fire alarm test at 11 o'clock this morning. For those of us that work at Summer Lane, we know very well, that will sound for 2 minutes. It is just a fire alarm test, so we do not need to leave the room. But what I'm proposing is whoever is speaking at that time just stops. And if we pause the meeting for a couple of minutes, I'll mute the recording and we'll let those 2 minutes pass and then we can resume. Okay. So without further ado, I'll pass to Councillor Second.
So thank you. I think there's possibly a few more in the room, but not a great deal. And also welcome to Chris and others online. Nice to see you. Bit of a foggy day in Birmingham today. And I've got the wrong glasses on. I've grown up in life. I should have gone for bifocals, shouldn't I? Anyway, so I haven't got very much to report other than I obviously, you know, it is disappointing. It is worth noting that at the bottom of our front page, Craig has very kindly checked out the quorum of this meeting, and we are still not for it. It's myself and 3 members, and I've got myself and 2, and the usual 2. Thank you. And these are the voting members. So once again, we will have to go to the Combined Authority Council meeting, and we will. I will present the decisions of this board as usual. But I'll probably do a little reminder at the end. But I do think we have, you know, tried hard to get people engaged in this meeting. And I think it isn't just us, it is actually other meetings as well. But I think we now have to wait until May, when we've got local council elections across the area, across the region. And I think once we've done that, and once we know our membership, Greg, I think if we can prepare a letter for me to write to the new members, or possibly from all of us here, as chair and vice chairs, it would be very helpful to try to encourage a more engaged membership, I think, from our voting members. I do appreciate enormously all the officers who put time, effort in preparing reports and helping us to come to the decision, and it must be disheartening for you. So we appreciate it. The one other thing is we're going to have a bit of an update on the first meeting of the Health Equity Advisory Council. I'm going to move to leadership first, but Mike, I think you might also be able to give us a bit of a brief on that as well. So should we take it now? Please, thank you.
So as you would have noted in last at the last board meeting, the Health Equity Advisory Council was established. The first meeting chaired by the Mayor of West Midlands was held on the 30th of January. It was attended by all of the chief execs of the ICB, all of the chairs of the ICPs, and by the Regional Director of Public Health, Professor Mike Wade, who's here. as well as a representative from the West Midlands Directors of Public Health and the Association of Directors of Public Health. So the chair of the Association of Directors of Public Health. The conversation at the meeting was around the Health of the Region report, and it was quite lively, and there's some actions and reflection back that we will put back into the report. I'll let Mike update on the in terms of how it went and the potential follow-up next steps that we're going to be looking to do.
Thanks, Councillor. Good morning, colleagues. To those who have not met, I'm Mike Wade. I'm the Regional Director of Public Health. So I'm a joint appointment between the Department of Health and NHS England, and it's great to be here in person. I think the first thing I'd say is that there was a real energy in the room between those colleagues in attendance and with our mayor. I think, as we all know, the public health system can feel quite fragmented. And I think the risk of that is that in a mayoral role, you're talking to an individual part of that very complex system on a routine basis. You're having different conversations with different perspectives. And I think that runs the risk of only ever being able to see different parts of the elephants at individual moments. So I think actually us all being in the room together was very much a way of looking at the whole elephant and trying to really understand around health equity and where the added advantage of us being in that space together with our mayor and what that means in terms of helping provide more strategic alignment and direction to support the board and the authority as a whole. We reflected on the report, clearly saddened by the lack of traction and progress we've made in the health inequality space since the previous report. Again, really the message from, I think, for all of us is, where do we need to align most to get the biggest bang for our collective book? And I think that's the nature of the conversation moving forward. So we did have some space to explore some ideas. So, for example, colleagues may have seen the idea of a Marmot region being floated as something that we might want to consider. But I think from my part, having the integrated care boards in the room, really getting the boards to think about their fourth purpose, which is very much about the NHS estate in supporting local economies, in supporting local communities, at a time we know that our chief execs are very much focused on waiting times, elective recovery, urgent emergency care, is absolutely critical. So I think there was a real commitment in that room to explore that space together to make sure that we're not duplicating, that we are aligning and seeing the additionality that the authority can bring in that space.
Brilliant. I'm very aware that I'm going to have to go back and do apologies in minutes, but let's do this because it's particularly of interest at the moment. Yes. Would you like to?
Firstly, my usual
Yes,
point
yes.
About how we don't have the duty for health, and therefore everything we do around health has to relate to the duties of the combined authority. That's not to say I'm not enthusiastic about the work of this board and the work that feeds into it, but particularly at the moment, mission creep needs to be avoided. And just to check out, were the innovative projects happening in Birmingham around employment in health mentioned at all? I'm thinking of the apprenticeship programs at Sandwell and West Birmingham that come with accommodation, which is brilliant. And some of the key team from that have gone to the Birmingham Women's and Children's Trust and are looking at a similar approach there, which links to Birmingham's anchor institutions work. The Women's and Children's people came to our corporate parenting board and were enthusiastic about what they could do to help our care leavers. So I think there is some grassroots innovation going on that deserves to be spread as well.
Yeah. And if we didn't touch specifically on that as an example of where there's so much rich activity going on at that hyperlocal level, that again, strategically just needs to be considered in terms of how things come together to get something better for the whole. I think that's absolutely the space and the benefit of this community coming together to make sure that those projects are supported, enhanced and amplified where it makes sense to do so, so we don't duplicate, or if we don't duplicate, we avoid duplicating.
Fantastic. I was going to, a couple of things I was going to follow up. In a way, there's so much that we can do in this space, and there's so many challenges, really. You know, the post-COVID mental health crisis, particularly in our young people. You know, how do we address that? How are we going to continue to get people into a more supported state? But actually, what I'm quite interested to know is one, prioritization, and two, what's the workflow and what's the next steps for the group?
Yeah, so I'll answer that, if that's okay. It's so as we stated, obviously the any type of work that's proposed through the council has to come to the Wellbeing Board for sign off and get the members to agree to it. And essentially the next steps that Mike was referring to was thinking about what are some of those big areas where we can actually focus our efforts on together across the system. So that's the next workshop that we're actually hosting with those members to think about those bigger picture things that we could actually work together on. And then the next council meeting itself, the Equity Advisory Council meeting, will be in the new mayoral term with whomever the mayor of West Midlands will be, because this will be after the elections, obviously. So the and it will be held in alignment with the Wellbeing Board, as we had said. So there's going to be regular updates from that meeting into the board for essential oversight, basically.
I think we'd appreciate that, and probably, as Karen has already, there might be some feedback and some questions as well, which would be good. So thank you. Look forward to the next update then. That would be really good from there. Okay, so moving backwards. Craig, may I just take apologies? I know Margaret Bell is not quite back in harness yet. She's had a new hip, and so she's just taken a little longer than she anticipated. So we haven't had her back to work yet. So have you any?
Yes, so a few apologies received. Councillor Bell, apologies noted. Councillor Gutteridge from Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council. And then we have Lisa Stally Green from Birmingham and Solihull ICB, Mark Axel, Black Country ICB, Philip Johns, Coventry and Warwickshire ICB, and Peter Wilson from the West Midlands Fire Service.
Thank you. I think we can note those. Can I also ask if anyone has got any declarations of interest? And the minutes of the meeting, which were held on the 12th, are in your pack. We've just got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages of those. I don't know if anyone had any matters arising or any corrections to those. I think as there's a pause and it's silent, I'm going to take those as agreed then. Thank you. Which moves us on to the first of these substantive items, which is the CA programme and learnings from other CA. So this is in your packs, and I think there you are, there. Excellent.
Let me just introduce.
Please do.
So as everybody knows, this is the Combined Authorities program, which we are hosting on behalf of the partnership across 9 CAs now. And it is funded by the Health Foundation And again, it's the next step from the previous project that we hosted, which was the City of Inequalities project. So we've got the delivery manager here today, Claire Humphreys, who's going to give us a quick update and what we've learned so far from the program and what we expect going forward.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks, everyone. So as previously said, I'm the delivery manager for the programme, more succinctly being referred to as the Combined Authorities Programme, but the full title being Improving Health and Reducing Inequalities Combined Authorities Programme. And next slide, please, Craig. Thank you for sharing them. So today is just an opportunity to reintroduce the programme as we've moved into the delivery phase, which is great, and we're just to talk through what the programme's hoping to achieve, how it's being delivered now that it is in that delivery phase, as well as some of the emerging insights that are coming through from that dedicated engagement that we're doing with combined authorities across the country. And then just to summarise and touch on some next steps as well for the board. Next slide, please. And again, thank you, Craig. We'll get there, we'll get smooth. So membership's already helpfully provided some background just to say that this isn't a programme that stands in isolation. There's been a successful predecessor project that was completed that the West Midlands Combined Authority were involved with alongside the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and the Greater London Authority, which investigated the levers and approaches that combined authorities can use to improve health and reduce inequalities within their populations. The app was also funded by the Health Foundation, and so further funding has been provided to build the current programme of work, which is building on the insights and expertise that was gained from that previous project to really look at how we can take that learning and start to work with CAs to actually take action at a regional level to do the work on improving health and reducing inequalities. So 1.3 million was awarded to the West Midlands Combined Authority as the lead authority to oversee this 3-year programme of work, but also working alongside a consortium of the grand majority of mayoral authorities and the Greater London Authority that exist currently in England. So it's a national scale project that the West Midlands is very much at the forefront of, which is exciting for the region. Next slide, please, Craig. And next slide again. So moving on then to what the programme is hoping to achieve. First and foremost, again, it's about capitalising on the momentum that was gained from the previous project to sustain capacity within combined authorities, to prioritise work, but also to make tangible progress on improving health and reducing inequalities. And as part of that, to help with extending the evidence base on how CAs can add value in this space. And also, of course, continuing to work with CA colleagues as their organisations evolve and change over time to continue to understand and utilise the levers that they have at their disposal to have an impact. Another key part of the programme is about strengthening collaboration and peer learning across combined authorities, recognising that whilst we have a central delivery team that can help to add that capacity and value, there's also huge value that can be sought from regions talking to one another and working in collaboration to tackle issues and reduce duplication of effort. Next slide, please, Craig. Thanks very much. So moving on then to how the programme is actually being delivered. So we're 5 months into delivery, I should say. So we started in October of last year. And there are 6 key components on this simplified diagram, and I'll just talk them through them as they're numbered on the screen. So first of all, we've got a governance board that's providing strategic oversight, advice on key policy issues, as well as other things like funding allocations in relation to the programme, particularly working closely with the central team. And membership of this is made up of representatives from each combined authority that's participating, as well as the Health Foundation, and it's chaired by the Head of Health and Communities here at the West Midlands Combined Authority, Mubashir, who's in the room, who's also the Senior Responsible Officer on the programme as the West Midlands, the lead authority on this work. So that's the governance board. The next up is the central team, of which I'm a member. So this is a team that's being hosted by the West Midlands Combined Authority. We're the kind of key driving force and engine behind delivery on this programme of work. As you can see, we're linked into every other delivery aspect involved in the programme. And our key focus is on how we can add that capacity and value to combined authorities to make progress in that workspace around improving health and reducing inequalities. And Craig, if you can hit the next button, there's a few boxes, I think, here. So just to highlight that in terms of governance, that as the central team is very much based at the West Midlands Combined Authority, we will report, of course, into this board as we're doing today and continue to do so. And we may also report into additional combined authority boards as we are requested to do so. So moving on then, and working alongside the central team are a series of embedded posts. So these are senior policy level posts that are situated within other participating combined authorities that are undertaking project work that align with those overall programme aims and objectives described in the previous slide. We currently have one in situ at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and there is scope as the programme progresses for additional posts to take part in other CAs. There's also some impact project work that we'll be looking to facilitate as the central team that will be led potentially by other combined authorities. Again, this is project work that could take many different shapes and forms, but it's key that it aligns with those programme aims and objectives, and there is some funding available for CAs to access to undertake that work. In addition, there is also a learning network, so aligning with that aim mentioned previously of wanting to improve collaboration and peer learning across combined authorities. It's really key that the central team is helping to facilitate a learning network made up of partners from combined authorities, but also wider system partners as well. That will be facilitated by various different mechanisms. We're looking to foster communities of practice, in particular policy spaces, for example. We're also looking to set up and host an online space that facilitates that knowledge and information transfer between partners. And last but not least, we've got the research and insights partner that sits slightly to the side of the key kind of central programme structures, as you can see. So these have been separately commissioned by the Health Foundation to do particular exploratory research around learning from regional devolution across the board in terms of the wider determinants of health, as well as health more directly, PALS directly. And they will work with the central. We will develop a close working relationship with them in the central team in order to ensure that the work that each of us are doing is kind of aligning with each other's aims and objectives too. So they'll be helping to distill some really key insights that are useful for the programme as well as their own research. So that's how the programme's being delivered. Next slide, please. So moving on then to some of the emerging insights that have come from early stages of delivery within the programme. As I've mentioned, we're 5 months in, and from the get-go, we've worked very closely with Governance Board, because as you'll have seen from our aims and objectives, we're not really lacking in ambition on this programme. We're looking to do a lot and we're working on a big scale. And so it's really important that we've been led by and been collaborating effectively with the participating combined authorities to prioritise our action and to be pragmatic with the resource that we have. So the three areas that have come through from early discussions in terms of prioritising that year one action around working health, developing relationships with integrated care systems, and political landscapes and devolution, particularly how to navigate those different landscapes and understanding the additionality and concerns and challenges that might come with different regional arrangements. And just to mention in relation to this, there is recognition, and there will be continued recognition, that there is obviously a lot that sits behind these three overarching categories, and understanding that each combined authority is very much in its own place along its journey in relation to each of these aspects. And so, like I say, that collaboration and co-development is really important as we progress with the programme. Next slide, please. Thank you. So following on from that recognition, of course, that different CAs are at different places along their journeys, we had decided as a central team that we needed to do some dedicated engagement with each of our CA partners to really understand the key context, systems, priorities and challenges that they were facing, so that we could continue to prioritise action and inform tailored support plans for different regions, and also understand shared challenges across the regions too. So the flowchart that you can see is just a high-level outline of the methodology that we used to approach these engagement sessions, making sure that we were building on the knowledge developed as part of the previous project, to form key lines of inquiry, so that we were in those engagement sessions developing new intelligence and understanding and an up-to-date understanding of situations too. And off the back of those engagement sessions, we've used that information to develop follow-up notes and also to complete some initial mapping and long listing of support needs and wants that have been highlighted by combined authorities. And that's what I'd like to talk through today in terms of those support categories that have been highlighted across the board by combined authorities at present. Next slide, please. So as you can see, there's been a bit of thematic analysis that's been done across those engagement sessions to understand actually what are the key challenges and support requirements that CAs are facing. And as I say, we've got participants from the grand majority of combined authorities that exist across the country. So this is, we found this a useful way to start to triangulate the key facts. And we've identified a long list currently of these four categories. So there's maximising regional potential to address health inequalities, tools that might help make the case for sector-specific action on inequalities, some talk around a specific thematic priority area, and peer support opportunities as well. And I'll just go through each of these one by one now to show the subcategories and information that's come out from them. Next slide, please. Okay, if you click through, you should get a full page of notes. Thank you. I realise I've made this difficult for you with the individual clicks. Thank you, that's perfect.
That's everything.
That's it, you got it, thank you. So starting with the first category, there was a lot of conversations that we had, and I should say we met with our governance board members, but also wider combined authority and system partners as part of these engagement sessions to get a variety of perspectives. But one of the key things that came up time and again, perhaps unsurprisingly given the nature of the programme, was how CAs can maximise their regional potential to address health inequalities. And one of the key categories that came up as part of discussion was health in all policies, or HIAP as it's referred to in its acronym here, and different models that can or are being used at a regional level to ensure that health is a consideration through all policies and key decision making. So particular interest around the structures and governance that's required to effectively implement health in all policies, as well as how the narrative is being co-developed and bought into to win hearts and minds in this space as well. And there was recognition that there are different ways of implementing HIAP, and that top-down kind of across organisational approach versus the sector-specific being driven within a particular policy space, such as housing or transport, for example. Another key area that was raised by multiple colleagues was around wanting to work effectively with regional systems, and different partners were mentioning different partners that they wanted to work with well, but across the board the kind of usual characters came up, things health system partners, local authorities, academic partners and the voluntary and community services, as well as others. Another key area of challenge and information want and need was around the devolution space in relation to the additionality that different regional arrangements can provide, but also some of the risks and concerns that come about both for combined authorities and wider system partners too. So that's something that wants to be explored. There was also talk around enabling tools and frameworks. I'll just pick out a couple here. So there's a move towards using really useful structures and frameworks like logic models, outcome frameworks, different evaluation methodologies, and there's a real appetite across regional footprints to want to be able to evidence and understand the value add of approaching things at that city region level and the tools and the frameworks that can be used to help make that case. There's also interest around how different change management approaches can be utilised to affect system change at that regional level. So that's something that we'd like to look into as a central team. Again, a mention around intra-regional learning, which feeds into our learning network efforts, naturally around system partners and devolution. And there was also mentioned by colleagues in South Yorkshire in particular, but has been discussed subsequently by other regional partners, is around how to potentially operationalise and mainstream the socio-economic duty, both at a combined authority level, but across the wider health system too, in terms of how that becomes a mechanism to both transparently and effectively address inequalities through decision making at that regional level. So that's that category. Moving on to the following three categories. Next slide, please. If you're okay to click through again, Craig, thank you. Perfect. So these are a bit less meaty, you might be relieved to see, but there's a bit more variety here. Another key area that came up was tools to help make the case for sector-specific action. So again, about implementing learning to really be able to actually take action in making that tangible progress. And a couple of points came up specifically in relation to this. One was around completing economic evaluations in relation to work streams that relate to the wider determinants of health, things like retrofitting, employment and skills programs that have natural alignment to health outcomes too, and using those evaluations to really build effective business cases for further investment in work streams that at a regional level that can improve health and reducing inequalities. Another key category that came up was work and health as a key thematic priority area. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given the amount of work that all combined authorities are doing in this space at varying levels, there was keen interest around the Universal Support Programme and different regional employment service models that are being utilised. And peer support was a key theme that came up time and again, both in relation to regional level policy and programmes that are being implemented and setting up potential communities of practice in those spaces, And also, as I've mentioned before, that understanding around devolved responsibilities, and pretty much every devolved responsibility was talked about at some point or another, hence the all in that graphic. So hopefully that gives you a flavour for where the appetite and interest is across the nation, really, in terms of combined authority support, wants and needs, and how as a programme we'll start to use this information to effectively prioritise the action that we take and start to think about which areas will do which bits of work in terms of the central team, the research and insights partner, and also the impact project work. I just also wanted to very briefly touch on that impact project work. Next slide, please. Thank you. And one more click should do it. Thanks, Craig. So just to touch on the fact that the impact project work is something that is very much evolving at the moment. As I've mentioned before, we're at the early stages of delivery, but as of January, we opened as a central team an application process for combined authority colleagues to apply for central team resource and or some central team funding to undertake impact project work that aligns with those programme aims and objectives, and also those thematic priority areas that have been highlighted for year one delivery. And the few that we've had in so far are really interesting and are things that we are looking to take forward as a central team in partnership with those requesting authorities and other interested parties. So the West Yorkshire Combined Authority colleagues have put in a request to commission some health economist support to calculate the return on investment of health and work interventions. This is currently a really broad ask that requires some serious scoping in order for it to be a useful, valuable task that will have applicability to other regions. So the central team will be reviewing the literature, we're consulting with relevant experts, and we will be refining that project scope to take back to governance board as something that we can move forward with, and hoping to use some central pot funds to facilitate that. We've also had a couple of asks in that are very similar to one another, both from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority and colleagues here at the West Midlands Combined Authority. As I mentioned in previous slides, there's huge interest around health in all policies, how to operationalise and implement that in the CA context, and also across the wider health and social care system as well. And so there's been an ask in terms of developing a resource that helps to implement that within specific CA contexts. Now, given that we have limited resource within the central team and we want to be pragmatic, it seems that given there's such an interest across the regions, that we start as a central team by developing a generic framework that contextualise the key research evidence literature on health in all policies at that combined authority level, which doesn't seem to have been done before. And then we'll then work with colleagues to scope the potential to contextualise that resource for specific individual combined authorities. So perhaps to move from more framework type tool into a toolkit that actually really helps to operationalise that within specific contexts. So that's how those are progressing, hoping to have lots more applications for impact project work as well as we continue. Next slide, please. And finally, just to summarise, last slide, please, Craig, thank you. So I appreciate I've been talking at you for a while. I won't talk through all of these one by one, but hopefully this talk has helped to reintroduce the programme, what it's looking to achieve, how we are working effectively with combined authority partners and wider system partners to start to take action on improving health and reducing inequalities at that regional level. As I've mentioned, the emerging insights are very much being used to develop tailored support plans, recognising where each combined authority is along its journey to health improvement and inequality reduction. And in the background, we're also working hard to facilitate and foster communities of practice, those peer learning opportunities, and also developing some other resources that will help to bolster these efforts as we move forward with the programme. And of course, further updates and findings will be reported to the board as we progress. But I hope that's been a useful overview for colleagues, and I will leave it there. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, very useful, very interesting to see the emerging themes and the work that you've identified that you're going to do together to gain some insight. I suppose in a way it's early days at this point in time, isn't it? And it's one of those things that it probably begs more questions than answers at this stage, doesn't it? I've got one or two. I don't know whether anyone else yet wants to come in. Shall I kick off with mine? So I suppose in the one at the health in all policies one that I think it was West Yorkshire you were talking about doing some joint, doing both the West Midlands and was it West Yorkshire?
Yes, yeah, it was
identified this as a theme that we're both following. So I guess in a way it's, what's the available resource for this? Are we pooling budgets together to try to get more bang for our buck out of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as part of this application process we've set up with the central team, there's a central pot of funding essentially that's tied to the project that combined authority colleagues can apply to access to undertake some of this impact project work. And there was also central team capacity that is dedicated to facilitating this work. So in the first instance, given that we are looking to develop a generic resource and we believe there's enough pre-existing literature that we can draw from, it will be a central team effort rather than having to dip into that funding. And we think that when we look to contextualise that framework into more of a CA-specific toolkit, that's when we might look to commission additional external support from those funds.
If we start going off down rabbit holes.
That's it. Yeah.
Which makes sense. And so I think you touched on it, but I just wanted to explore this further. So as the work develops, is there a planned sort of a joint page that people will be able to access from the different combined authorities to explore and take further work that you've done there?
Yes, yeah. So we've just worked with the comms team here at the West Mid CA to develop some web pages within the website. So that will be the main hub for information. And we've also got some web pages via the Health Foundation. So absolutely we can share those and that will contain all the updates.
Fantastic. And sort of working through the report, which actually is really interesting. We've got some recommendations which I was just having a look at there. And the bit that sort of grabbed me before we got to the recommendations, but they are in there, is around the sort of the health outcomes and work, which are so related, and in particular looking at the older age group, because and these are assumptions rather than evidenced, but the assumption is that post-COVID there were quite a few people who didn't actually come back to work, and at that time there was quite a lot of resource available, which came with the COVID money. But since then we've had inflation, we've had a lot of challenges around energy costs, and etc., and that older age group who decided that actually that was possibly a route that they would take may have found themselves in a more difficult financial situation, which is super linked to health inequalities. And in a way, I suppose the lessons learned is an important outtake from there, but also what do we do about them now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've one of the first policy pieces we did, so we've got some policy officers as part of the central team that are helping to provide some of that key policy analysis to combined authority colleagues to support in these key areas, is develop a policy briefing around economic inactivity and health. So that's helped to raise, I guess, the profile of key recommendations and policy developments in that space that combined authority colleagues can then use to inform their programmes and interventions. And actually the embedded post that I referred to that's situated within Greater Manchester, their work is around economic inactivity in the 50 to 64-year-old population for those that have long-term health issues. So we're doing some really targeted work on that and we'll be looking to share those findings as we progress.
It'd be very interesting to see how those particular pieces, well, I'd be interested to see how those particular pieces are taken up by different authorities. Sorry, I've monopolised it a bit. Does anyone else want to come in with any questions to Claire on this? Yeah,
may I? Thank you. It was so helpful to read the paper and have the presentation just to understand the context of the programme. So thank you for that. There were just 3 quick points. The first is a lot of what's being described is about process, and I'm just trying to understand the relationship of process to impact and the outcomes. So, for example, and we've already picked up on this in some of the other conversations, if we know in the West Mids infant mortality, child death is a really important outcome for us, how in the processes you're describing are you being able to distill, okay, that's the local authority role, that's what it's doing, this is the role of the NHS in the system, this is the additionality that the combined authority can bring in this space, and then understand how that additionality actually has led to making an impact on some of those outcomes. And I think that's the space that I'm really excited about. And then I think tied into that, there's that, again, it goes back to the strategic alignment piece. How do we, for example, reduce the risk of multiple conversations with our academic partners to support on the breadth of outcomes, rather than actually thinking strategically about the 3 or 4 key subject areas we really want to focus on together. And then the final point I wanted to make is the interest in how the different authorities are configured with different duties, and where you're starting to see differences in impact and scale of impact because of those differences through this programme. So there's a lot in there.
Yeah. And when you're talking about authorities, we're talking about combined authorities rather than the authorities within.
Yeah.
So, yes,
It's complex.
To give a relatively short and simple answer to the last part of that question, is that's really something that we're expecting the research and insights partners to really delve into, and then to feed into us in the central programme. So they've just come on board, so we're just starting to form that working relationship with them, but I'm hoping in the coming months that they'll start to delineate some of that stuff, distill those key insights and feed it back to us in the central team as well as the Health Foundation, so that we can create a wider picture as part of our programme. So that's TBC essentially, but really excited to see what happens with that. I think, oh yes, we can now, can't we? Because they've been contracted. So it's the King's Fund and the Centre for Local Economic Strategy as a sort of joint partnership approach.
very good.
Yeah, and good pre-existing strategic links with, which is positive. I think to answer the first part of the question, as part of the programme and then through this first year of delivery, a really key thing that we're working on is a theory of change for the programme, and I think that's how we start to delineate it's joining all of those dots that you've mentioned essentially, and we're also looking to see where we can do that within specific combined authority contexts as well, particularly around the impact project work. Feels like might be a clear way to do that. So again, that is under development, but that's the framework and structure that we're looking to be able to start to delineate that, and hopefully bring back to colleagues with an update on to look at how those impacts are being achieved. And there's lots of talk at Governance Board at the moment around outcome frameworks and how we can drive consistency and transparency across regions as well, to really look at where that additionality is at the regional level. So it's driving a lot of what we're doing. And remind me of the second part of your question.
About the alignment, and I think it's maybe a question also to the advisory group about how we ensure that we are, when we're working with external partners, not having multiple conversations, which is slightly nuanced, rather than thinking about a strategic ask to collaborate in that space, I think.
Yeah.
Particularly with academic partners.
Yeah. It's been the links with academic partners have been highlighted a few times in those engagement sessions that we've had. I'm hoping that some of the peer learning activity that we'll do will start to highlight perhaps where multiple conversations are happening and how we then help to centralise that. And like I say, we're looking to create this online space that also creates a bit of a central hub, so that you're not just having all these disparate conversations. We've actually got like a central place to start and store and organise that information. So hopefully that will start to address that.
Thank you.
Membership.
Yeah, just a quick on that is around kind of developing the outcomes framework, around developing a theory of change. I think some colleagues, especially you, Mike, will find it interesting that we will have public health consultant support to be able to kind of strategically advise on that and lead on that piece of work. So we have one embedded at the moment within the team. She works in GLA, but we're going to have an additional consultant come on board as well for the program. So it is something which is a big part of the program that we're trying to bring out. And around the alignment point, obviously, it's something that every part of the system is struggling with to ensure. But that's one of the learnings that I'm assuming that we're going to come up with.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask one more? So in one of the early slides, you done a effectively cut a pie chart, and you were talking about those 3 areas which were around health, ICSs, and political landscape. And I suppose I wanted to tease out what's the impact of that, and and at a time when we're about to enter political change again. you know, how do we ensure that the research work that we do retains its credibility, value, and the importance of actually this is a piece of work that's going to help to feed the future and how we try to sort of change opportunities. So can I tease a bit more about that? I guess although I've thrown in 2 other parts of it, I'm interested in the political landscape bit. Of course.
So at the very first governance board session that I was part of, that's where we really teased out those priority areas. And of course, given the political landscape that we're in with elections forthcoming, that was highlighted naturally as a really key part of something that we should be factoring in as a part of the programme. So one thing, yeah, so
Opportunities and challenges.
yeah. And so I think at the latest governance board, which took place last month, we are facilitating a bit of information sharing amongst colleagues about how at the city region level manifesto development is or isn't being influenced in relation to health and inequality. So that's part of the kind of pre-election cycle and what we're looking to facilitate and understand about what's happening at the regional level. And then shortly after the elections, we'd like to stand up a bit of a post-election learning opportunity across the region. So it's really that kind of facilitating peer learning aspect in relation to the political stuff, I'd say, at the moment. And then obviously understanding the impact of the forthcoming elections and what happens off the back of it. I hope that helps to answer the question.
If I can just add, I think one of the kind of overall objectives, aims, although maybe not listed as one, of the program is around recognizing the journey of each of the partner in their devolution or maturity of the health function, and related to that is the level of involvement and influence with the political leadership of that combined authority or mayoral city region. So that's one of the things that we are looking definitely to do. For example, the impact of the program overall should be measured in the sense of the distance traveled from where that. So, for example, if East Midlands Combined Authority were to come on board, or one of the other ones which is brand new, their improvement through the program would be more about actually recognizing the levers that they have for influencing health. Whereas for something like GLA or even us or Greater Manchester, it's actually how do we then make an actual impact on the ground through those powers. And so it's about those type of things and actually trying to have a shift from just policy to practice, which is what we're trying to achieve in some of the advanced.
And that's obviously of interest to me particularly. So and that's an early stage. Yeah. Wonderful. Timeline for the next iteration?
In terms of an update, well, it's a good question. I mean, we're due to submit our end of year 1 impact report around June, July time. So I think we'd have more of a substantive update on a few of these items by then, likely.
That'd be really interesting, I think. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, and of course, just I suppose the one last thing. I mean, I always hark back to Greater Manchester and their good, because health was so much, part of the big model when they went into that, and there were 10 authorities that had worked very closely together, and all that went. So there's a maturity around them, which I suspect we can learn a lot from, and perhaps the glitches as well as the successes over the years that they've achieved. But it's not been that easy, I think. So yeah, that would be.
Whether it's made a difference to the outcomes we're most concerned about.
Yeah.
It was actually highlighted in our recent engagement session with them, that they are still trailing behind on some really key outcomes, and therefore they're really keen to benefit from that peer learning opportunity, despite the kind of structural successes that they've had in that one team approach. So yes, it's really interesting to see it from very different perspectives.
Very interesting. Look forward to the next update on that. Thank you very much. Sorry, that's me shutting it up. Does anyone else want to come in? No. Okay, no one online. Lovely. Thank you very much, Claire, for that. It'll be interesting to hear the next in the summer, I think. When the what summer? When? Okay. Moving on, agenda item 5 is the health in all policies implementation and joint report that we've got before us. And we recall that this has been a program we've been, oh gosh, we can go back to January 22, I see in here, and it's had varying degrees of interaction over the last years. So I'd be interested to know where we've got to on this, and I've got a few particular points worked out. Are you going to introduce this?
I will do.
One.
Craig, can we share some slides, please? So hoping there's a theme to be seen in the agenda items today. So we talked a little bit about, you know, what everyone is doing around health and all policies in terms of what combined authorities can do through their devolved responsibilities on health. And this is obviously something that we have brought to the board, and has something that we've been pursuing to do systematically since the inception of the CA, I suppose. But I think the journey that we've been on is almost maturing in a sense with each year, and I think we are in a space where we are better able to kind of identify how health and all policies is going to be implemented in a West Midlands context. So I'm just going to take us through a little bit about where it's been and where it's headed, and then we'll bring in an example of how we're doing it in practice, I suppose, within one of our directorates at West Midlands Combined Authority. So Craig, next slide, please. I don't think I need to go into the definition of health and all policies. I think we're quite familiar with it. But essentially what we have, as I said, since for a while now, we've worked with our colleagues at Public Health England, ex-Public Health England, and now obviously Office of Health Improvement and Disparities. Essentially the team that Mike leads. And we have identified a policy approach or an outcomes approach that we want to take to health and all policies that kind of includes a few milestones that we wanted to hit in terms of what we think could be and would be useful. We've developed dashboards to capture the metrics and the outcomes. And we've started to work with each of our directorates within the combined authority. Now to kind of try and put a bit of a umbrella structure to this approach. Next slide, please. We presented back to the board in terms of how we are going to go about doing this back in 2022. We've started to put that in practice, and now I think it's time to revisit this. So next slide. To think about how we can actually do those in a three-pronged approach. So there's something about embedding it within the strategic and cultural aspects of the combined authority. This includes the partnership that we have with Inclusive Growth, but also thinking about how we influence some of the functional strategies and the single settlement agreement that's coming down the road for West Midlands as a trailblazer. Devolution deal partner alongside Greater Manchester, and then the kind of embedding in the processes of the combined authority. So you know, making the case of why we want to address wider determinants, and then putting it into the governance structure appropriately, and then the operational embedding, which is the logic models and actually working with partners and testing, learning, and disseminating. So just next slide, please. In terms of partnership with Inclusive Growth, yeah, I know it's just you're not going to be able to see those, but it's in the Health of the Region report is what I was going to highlight. you will have seen the draft of it already. And we're not publishing this obviously until the new mayoral term, but within that you will see how we are actually embedding health and all policies within an inclusive growth approach at the combined authority. And then it is something which is complementary, but then I think we talked last time when I talked about this, we talked about how deeper we can go into the outcomes for health. But in reality, health, quote unquote, health is encapsulated by all of those elements of the inclusive growth fundamentals. So it is something which is quite complementary and something that within the West Midlands Combined Authority, we've had good success of embedding overall. Next slide. So from a governance structure, again, you cannot read that. The idea is that we have embedded the HEAT tool that's developed by colleagues in DHSC and to embed that with the EQIA, the Equity Impact Assessment, and we have done so. And the resultant one is called the HEQIA that we are using in our processes. However, the actual kind of embedding into the assurance framework and utilizing it for all projects is something that we're still working on. And to also be able to actually make it something which is a usable tool and easy to use tool, and something which actually is something that comes as a matter of fact when you start thinking about a project, rather than something that gets done as a tick box exercise at the end of the project. So so that's something that's still a work in progress, but we've started with the embedding of the tool into our assurance framework, but we need to actually really have a shift in the way everybody approaches it across the board. The other thing that around governance that we've done, as we talked about last time, was joint reporting into thematic boards. So for health and employment, we're developing the joint board with the labour market subgroup. So this subgroup will have members from the Wellbeing board, interested members who want to be involved in that thematic area, as well as people from the skills advisory board who'd like to be part of that. And this subgroup will report into both thematic boards, so the Wellbeing board as well as the skills advisory one. Similarly, we're doing the same with housing, as you will hear, and we want to do the same with transport. So that's one of the things that we are doing, which is actually going to make the health and all policies quite real with the involvement of the other thematic boards. So next slide, please. And then when we get into the operational side of kind of building the evidence and actually doing the work, I'm going to talk about the example from housing, and Simon's going to come in and talk about this because he's leading that side of the work. But what we've done and what you've seen in the paper is develop a close working relationship. We're sharing evidence and sharing accountability. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to get Simon to come in and talk about a little bit more from the next slide onwards.
If you could, Craig. I think it's really important to add that each one of us as in the Movishers team have that higher responsibility for different directorates. So I had the opportunity to work with Housing and Regen as colleagues like Rachel picks up around transport, Tatum around digital and employment skills. And I think we'll really benefit from that higher framework that you refer to, so we can be really clear on our approach, really look at our relationship with local authorities, OHID and other ICBs and other stakeholders. And how do we really begin to realise that added value that has the system? We all know that housing is critical in terms of health improvement. Exposure to poor housing conditions, damp, cold, mould, noise is strongly associated with poor health, both physical and mental. Specific physical effects are morbidity, including respiratory conditions, cardiovascular, transmission of communicable diseases, and increased mortality. Living in non-decent, cold, overcrowded housing and unaffordable housing has been associated with increased stress and a reduction in the sense of empowerment and control. and also we know fundamentally that the impact of children living in overcrowded housing has an impact on their behaviours, their performance, as well as their health. But we also know there are things that we need to begin to push and change, not least in terms of areas around affordable housing, accessible housing. And it's not the house itself, it's the community in which people live. Next slide. We have spent some time, and this is a very early version of a logic model that we're beginning to develop with our housing team. It looks very complex, but if you can read it, I can't read it even with my glasses on my screen or on here. It's the bottom right hand corner around impact that we're trying to make. And this is a co-designed logic model that we're developing with our housing team, similar to exercise that we're doing with transport, employment and skills, etc. And what we will find this a really interesting piece, if you can move on again, Craig, it is about understanding the appetite of our Housing and Regeneration Directorate to have a real strong look through the lens of health and wellbeing in the context of their devolution powers. And where is that opportunity to really land and shift policy, and where is the barriers that there may be in terms of seeing that shift? So we've spent a lot of time recently around the future home strategy, and that is really driven by our net zero targets. But we know that we'll benefit from around new houses which are well ventilated, good circulation, and also we begin to look at through a connected piece of work we're doing around accessible housing for disabled people and elderly people, as the chair referred to earlier. We can begin to see, and we've got some real clear evidence of where we need to push.
Nearly there when Craig tells us.
Yes.
Yes. Back where we were.
Okay, so particularly
Say 2 minutes.
You've got the message.
There we go.
Good.
So particularly looking at a context of health devolution powers, and what is really important within our housing and regeneration team, they do not have any planning powers. But our work and engagement has enabled us to begin to work closer with them, be part of the team, and very much looking at how we're working through that health advocacy through their own governance and operations. We've started taking papers to their housing steering group as well as their housing regeneration board. And as a result of this, we're also looking at ways in which we are connecting with local authorities and ICBs around their influence and impact, particularly around hire and on housing. And I was saying to Mike earlier, we're now part of the Black Country Health and Housing Forum, which has been established and funded through their ICB to begin to look at what are those impacts and opportunities around health. So my last slide, you'll be pleased to know. Right.
Sorry.
Is we've been really positioned around what is our people influence, how we're using our evidence to begin to identify specific priorities where we can really focus on that influence and change. And a big capture similar to what Claire was referring to around the CAP work is how do we capture the learning from doing that work. So as I said, Pooja within our team is now embedded in their team today. She's working solely within our housing regeneration team, developing those relationships, developing that knowledge and understanding around health, testing out some of our thinking and direction where we go, and begin to, through that work, begin to prioritise where we could have that opportunity to influence around that health narrative, around the impact of the delivery of, for example, the affordable house strategy in terms of the impact it would have on health. How do we begin to connect and align the health system? There's some considerable interest within our housing team to get better with ICB state management teams. So how can we begin to do that planning at a regional level around that investment? What we begin to and have to give us the opportunity to explore around some of those themes that are looking at with local authorities around compulsory purchase and land assembly, and how do we get that real strong social value element around improving health? How can we connect some investment streams down the line? Because one of our biggest learning is, although there is appetite, there is a real fixed budget the CA has for its housing development. So there's not much buffer for improvement. So actually we need to begin to develop policy. We need to connect the health system and the housing system where we can, and we need to explore where that additional investment is going to come in to deliver change. And through this work, we're looking to see through this board if we can develop a health and housing advisory group. We bring that subject matter very much like a community practice. What we're learning, are we getting this connection between local issues and challenges, opportunities? Can we scale up some real innovative practice that's taking place at local level, at a regional level? And where do we see that relationship with housing from a local level to regional level to deliver change? Hopefully, you'll be able to, when you'll be able to read those impacts, we can begin to see what progress we're making as a CA and the added value we're creating to the region around that higher work. Over to me, Vision.
Brilliant. Next slide, please. So in terms of the overall kind of HIAT work then going forward, as I mentioned, kind of, thinking on those 3 steps: strategic, culture change, and then governance, and then actually thinking about the operations as well. So in terms of the overall kind of culture and strategic change, one of the things that I've mentioned is to influence the functional strategies for single settlement. And there's been 5 pillars that have been identified where we're going to make a case across, again, both Greater Manchester and West Midlands. And what we want to do is align our approach to thinking about supporting the HIAP work is through multiple disadvantage, similar to what GM is doing. And so that's one way to try and influence it. But really, we just want to make sure that the functional strategies reflect an influence of health, or the influence that those responsibilities can have on health. And we've been able to do so already in the skills and employment strategy, which has already been approved by the WMCA board. And we will be doing the same with the other 4. The other bit obviously is, as mentioned in Claire's update on the CAP program, we want to develop an overall HIAP framework and to kind of think about how we've embedded HIAP well, or not well, for that matter. I've just put down one example of framework here, and again, poorly coming up on screen, but essentially it's from an academic paper, and it's giving 6 stages of assessment of how well we embed HIAP. And it's something that we potentially could look into, but again, that's a work that we'll do with the CAP program to assess what the best framework would look like as we go into it, and that's something that Rachel's going to be working with them on. So this is the kind of direction travel. Obviously, Simon also mentioned that we've got similar approaches being developed or worked on within transport, within environment and energy, and what you'll hear next in the next paper is what we've been doing since the inception of the CA, which is doing it quite well within employment and skills with our Thrive programs. So again, when I say there's a theme to, I'm quite proud of the fact that there's a theme to the agenda today. But yeah, so that's going to be in practice. You'll see how we've been doing it all along, in a sense. So that's going forward. That's what's coming through. Happy to have a discussion at this point.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you, Simon, for your update on the housing and health element. Can I pick up just a question? So the slide that we couldn't read up there that I have just about managed to read in here, which I think are one and the same. One of the themes on housing that I absolutely agree with all of the points you made about warm homes, affordable, and all that goes, the needs for families to feel healthy within that. The other one I didn't see in here, but it may be that you are covering it, is around safety and safe communities, and that part of it. I don't know whether that can or should be built in, or should it be separate? I don't know. But I think about some of my own super output areas and some of the really difficult challenges for people in their homes is when they effectively feel almost imprisoned in their homes because of the environment outside, you know, and it might be kids who are sort of running amok. It might be, you know, actually, we've got a lot of these moped drivers driving around and people feeling very unsafe. I just sort of wonder whether that too could find its way into the housing element, or whether it's just adding another dimension that dilutes it too much.
No, I really pleased you picked that up. It's very much a connected agenda. I think the challenge is how far the devolved power remit is for housing and regeneration within our directorates. We want to explore this further, and we would like, and it's not detailed in paper, but Leo Pollack, who's the head of policy for housing and regeneration, I've asked him whether he can come and present where they are with their strategy and direction at our next meeting. Okay. But we are beginning to explore the issue around safety, around sense of community wellbeing through our housing provision and across the region through the initial work that Helen's exploring on the inclusive communities strategy.
Yeah, so it's very, very early days, but it's recognising that work that we do across the whole combined authority, there becomes a blur, doesn't there, as you start to centre where the work needs to sit, as you kind of go around that inclusive growth wheel donut even that we want to see going forward. So recommendations such as that are things that would be really great to be forwarded to me to be able to start to think about, because we are really looking at how we shape what we think about for inclusive communities, because it's quite a nebulous term, isn't it? I mean, where does that stop? But I think this sits very beautifully within that.
Yeah. Well, Karen, you were nodding. You think that's quite relevant.
I was nodding at the donut
Oh,
reference.
sorry.
You've got that on
Who's
your
got the
desk.
donut?
The book, not the donut.
I'd like
We
both
can't go
at the
far
moment.
No. Okay.
The other one would help too.
Is that something you would like brought up then through our representation?
In all honesty, I don't know yet, but I think that's about, again, you
Perhaps
know,
we just shouldn't
we're on
lose it.
grey areas, aren't we? So yes, let's not
Not lose
it
it at this stage.
and try to understand where we think it should land.
Yeah,
But
okay.
really happy to pick up the conversations about that.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce the concept of community land trusts into the discussion, partly because they're place-based and they allow local people to take part in a democratic way. And I think being able to participate in the ownership of what you do is good for your well-being in general. But also CLTs can actually focus on things like safeguarding and well-being and all of the things that we've been talking about. And I just wondered if they might be part of the solution somewhere.
It's certainly we'll pick up with Leo, and if there's an opportunity for him to come in to the future meeting, we can ask him to give his and the director's considered opinion on where CLTs fit within their work and direction. Thank you.
I would also say, I mean, I think one of the things that we're looking to do, as we've mentioned, is that the joint subgroup on health and housing. I think to try and really drive this forward, this work that's kind of been put in motion, it'd be down to that subgroup to be able to really push that and actually be able to kind of unpick some of the things that we're talking about in terms of the blurred lines and bringing in some of the additionality. So absolutely, I think it's on the forward plan already that we're suggesting that it should come back, but I think a lot of the driving of most of these high-app pieces of work that we're going to start doing will need to probably be done at that subgroup level, and then to be able to bring in to the thematic boards major updates going forward. So absolutely agree on all of that. Just kind of saying that I think we need to kind of also embed that structure in place.
So is it on the housing board? Would this health and all policies, and perhaps would we be going to represent there?
Absolutely, we've begun by terminology, right? We can say terminology today. We are starting to take papers through housing steering group, which is the officers group, which then obviously the minutes go through to the housing board, and we are getting some traction. We are getting some movement, and actually, what we found really interesting, the interest and appetite around health is very strong across our local authorities. The appetite of our housing regeneration team to work alongside our ICBs is really favourable, and actually the accessible housing work is kind of triggered a positive nerve around actually how do we integrate that within our housing policy moving forward.
So on those 5 themes that you've got, which I hastily scribbled down there, is that these ones, Livershire, local growth, local transport, skills and employment, housing and regen, net zero?
Yes, essentially, they will be the relevant thematic boards for those. Yes.
Okay. I can recognise, you know, we've got the next paper on Thrive, and so there's sort of skills and employment. Simon, you've talked about the housing. We've done some work with transport in the past. I'm kind of wanting to know how how things are emerging further up the scale, or not, whether we've got capacity to manage all of these.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Capacity becomes an issue, obviously, because as has been said many times, we don't have a health responsibility of the combined authority, which means that the funding that we receive from local authorities is not directly allocated to the team. And as such, we're trying to work with colleagues in those other devolved areas, devolved responsibility areas. So this is why joint working is quite important.
Yeah.
We're also working with colleagues at OHID to try and join forces and see where we can actually do things together once rather than having to duplicate efforts. So it will always be an issue, but I'm hoping the idea that we are going to be making influence in these spaces, which will have an impact at local place level, we can then make a case for growth within the team. But absolutely, as we expand, I think we will prioritize things which are doable, and things that will be down the pipeline will probably require more capacity.
Just looking to see if anyone else wants to come in on this. So, I mean, I know we're not core, but we have got the recommendations down at page 25, which is reviewing the approach and noting it, and it's just asking for advice on potential collaboration, joint working, propagation of work from across the West Midlands Combined Authority region partners. Is there anything we want to bring out there through the next week's Combined Authority that you want me to identify, or are we happy to leave it as the papers is written? Okay, go with that. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And then, so next paper is following the theme. It's the Thrive Programmes update. Jason, I think you're able to give us an update.
Thank you, Chair. Morning all. Yes, I am providing an update with on the Thrive programme, so Thrive at Work and Thrive into Work. Taking up the baton actually of the HIAP piece that we've been talking about right the way through. These are programmes that we have been running for quite some time and are a very good example of how we do HIAP within the kind of skills and what was productivity and skills, but skills and kind of employment agenda, so the kind of work and health agenda. For many of you that have been around for a while, you'll know the Thrive programmes because, as I said, we've been running them since pretty much the inception of the CA. They do normally feature in the HLD's update paper, but we're drawing them out today because there's some quite significant changes that have happened recently and are on the horizon. So it's mainly that I'm focusing on today. I'll take them in turn. I'll start with Thrive into Work. So just to give everyone a baseline of understanding of where we're at with that. Thrive into Work is our version of IPSPC, which is the IPS model, which is individual placement and support in primary care, which is the PC bit. Previously, this was a health-led trial way back from 2018, ran for a couple of years as a trial. Then we had a post-trial service, but now we are running the programme as IPSPC, which comes from a national kind of IPSPC pot. And there are a number of other sites across the country that run IPSPC, but we're kind of seen as at the forefront of that because we've been running Thrive into Work as it's known locally for such a long time. Just some reassurance that currently things are on track. So we secured from the IPSPC pot, we've secured 7.9 million to run this programme for the 2 financial years. The one that we're in currently that we're drawing to a close, and then next year as well we've got the IPSPC programme running, as I said, known locally as Thrive into Work, and things are running on track. We're doing okay. The numbers I've given you a snapshot in the paper of how things are for this year and our quarters this year, so it reports the end of Q3 in this financial year. But the bigger changes that I wanted to draw attention to is around how we are doing the contracting this time round in this phase. So previously we've had the involvement of the ICB, or what was initially the CCG, to hold the funding for the programme because we weren't able to do that when we were a less mature combined authority. We weren't able to hold the funding. We are now able to do that. So we have a direct funding agreement with DWP. And we have issued back-to-back grant funding agreements to our 2 delivery partners, which is the Shaw Trust and Black Country Healthcare Foundation Trust, that run 5 lots with us across the geography of the CA, as well as having a specialist pathway in neurodiversity. So that's the real kind of big change that's happened recently. We still work very closely with the RICB partners, but they are no longer part of the kind of programme management or any of the kind of delivery for the Thrive Into Work programme. I've given a small update on finances. Finances are on track with that as well. We did have a slight wobble with some rule changes with DWP recently, whereby they said that we couldn't carry forward funding from year 1 into year 2, but that has since been changed and we're back to the usual process that we're working to. So everything, a risk that had emerged is no longer. So just to provide some reassurance that the finances are fine there. Another significant thing that I want to draw attention to is the governance on the programme. So in the health-led trial, the very first version of the programme, there was a programme board specifically to Thrive Into Work, worked as usual kind of programme boards do. Since then, we've had a bit of a hiatus on the governance arrangements in terms of a specific programme board for it. Performance is monitored internally now and through a performance panel meeting series that's fairly recently been set up, and it is aligned to some of the other governance changes that have happened internally in terms of delegated sign-off and the like. So in terms of the governance around our local authorities and colleagues being part of the development of Thrive Into Work, that happens essentially through our HLD update, but we do recognise now that kind of strengthening of that work and health agenda and some of the changes that are on the horizon, that there is a proposal now to have a new kind of governance group that will not look after Thrive exclusively, but Thrive Into Work will report into a subgroup around health, employment and labour market participation. And that group will report into this Wellbeing board as well as the skills advisory board. So there's plenty of kind of governance there, but as I said, it will work differently to having a specific programme board as we used to have way back in the first health-led trial. Just a few updates on some current projects that are happening with Thrive Into Work. So there are GP pilots that we're working on. So this is closer working relationships with GPs in terms of referrals into the programme. Thrive Into Work has a self-referral mechanism, a route in, which has always been a kind of almost a backstop, but it's proportionately been higher than we would have liked. And the point of the IPS model is for the service of this intensive employment support for those with health barriers to employment should have that kind of co-located service within health. We work to a modified IPS model, so we get to as close as we can to a kind of co-location with health, but we're trying to strengthen that relationship with GPs and get some direct referrals with GPs primarily in the Black Country. We're working on a kind of localised level to work with specifically fit notes. So when a fit note is issued of 4 weeks and above, but there is a desire and a potential for that patient to have help and support in terms of retaining their job or finding a new job, that should kind of flag in to the Thrive Into Work, one of our delivery partners, and have a referral mechanism through that. So that's something we're trialling. We are also working closely with DWP colleagues who are trialling a similar model of kind of co-location called the Community Connector model. So we've been developing these for quite some time to kind of try and understand what's the best route in terms of kind of triaging a patient into the best employment support service for them according to the intensity of their need. At the same time, obviously, work and health, economic inactivity due to ill health has been a massive issue on even central government agenda. And what we've found more recently is the emergence of the work well idea. So just to point out that a couple of the developments on the horizon are around Work Well, which is a low intensity employment support service, but will also have a kind of triaging function into more intensive employment support. So Thrive Into would be a kind of recipient of that triaging function, and hopefully Work Well, which is supposed to be provided, well, the key accountable body for Work Well will be the ICB. that will provide that kind of neutral triaging aspect for the many employment support services that there are out there, and should better be able to triage according to patient need. But just to underline that Workwell is not yet operational, and we don't know where it's going to be. So the competition was opened late last year. They are going to, the expressions of interest were due in late January this year. Was it late January? In January this year. And we should find out who will be awarded that programme in the next few weeks, because it will start in the next financial year for the next 2 financial years. There is a 6-month mobilisation period, and then an 18-month delivery period for the Workwell programme. All 3 of our local ICBs have submitted bids into that. We are hopeful that at least one in the region will get Workwell, but let's not forget that the NHS's definition of region is wider than our own. So really they're looking at the 6 ICB patch, and we know that 5 of those 6 did submit bids. But we're hoping, well, we know that our bids for the 3 in our patch were very strong, and we wrote letters of support for those bids. So fingers crossed there. Another really relevant point on the horizon for Thrive Into Work is that universal support, as Claire referenced earlier, is coming down the line. We're expecting that in autumn of this year. We're expecting some guidance on that in summer of this year. Arguably, it could be pushed back to spring next year. But what we know about universal support is that it is aiming to provide a similar service to Thrive Into Work, and take some of the key features from Thrive Into Work into that kind of provision. So part of the reason for having the subgroup around health, employment and labour market participation is to be able to have a kind of strategic overview of all these developments and how they might fit together, and how we take the best of our learning of the work that we've been doing in this space for quite some time through into that, and be a kind of real trailblazer for those programmes. I'm just going to stop a minute and just check, do we want to have a discussion on Thrive Into Work specifically, or shall I go on to Thrive at Work as well?
I think let's carry on with Thrive at Work.
Yep, okay, yep. Okay, so Thrive at Work, again, is a programme that we've had running from the Combined Authority for quite some time, since the first Mental Health Commission. It is an employer accreditation programme focused on workforce wellbeing. I think sometimes that the fact of it being an accreditation programme belies its kind of real value in the point of Thrive at Work, and our team's work that kind of holds the hands of primarily SMEs, but a whole range of organisations across the region, holds their hand in terms of putting the right kind of health and wellbeing offers in place for their employees, and creating real kind of cultural change around health and the centrality of health with these employers is the real kind of impact on the ground of the Thrive at Work programme. So it's a great programme, and it really has that kind of transformative feel in that it's really looking to the preventative agenda. We don't want more people falling into economic inactivity due to ill health, and the best way to prevent that is to have employers that look after the health of their employees, or at least cognizant of it, and can put offers in place. So that's what that's really trying to do, and it's worked well for many years. Most recently, it's been part of the Midlands Health Productivity Pilot, MHPP, led by Coventry University. Unfortunately, that funding is now coming to an end. So we were due to stop delivery with MHPP in December 2023. They have kindly let us use some underspend that had accrued to carry on delivering to the targets that we had to the end of this financial year, so pretty much now. And I'm really pleased to say that we have hit 3 out of the 4 KPIs and hit them well. And that ability for us to kind of carry on those few months has enabled certainly one of those to be picked up. And yes, so 3 have been delivered. So it's doing well. Again, in the paper, you do have a snapshot of that progress and how we've worked across this financial year. Just to underline, though, that these figures, so we've been targeting 126 employers in terms of signing up to the programme, and 126 in terms of getting the people through the accreditation. through this most recent MHPP phase of the programme. However, our fuller numbers, when you consider the fullness of Thrive pre the MHPP programme, we're closer to nearly touching 600 employers that have signed up to the programme and touching 200 employers that have gone through accreditation. So this is just a snapshot of our current kind of performance there. So just to underline some kind of big changes that are happening with the programme now, as I said, the MHPP funding is drawing to a close. We have secured some internal funding to continue the programme in the next financial year. It's been a battle. It's been really tough. We have about a tenth of the previous funding we've been enjoying for the last few years, and we have about a third of the staff to work this through, but we are continuing with it in the next financial year, and we are trying to make better use of our assets through linking up more closely with Business Growth West Midlands. So Business Growth West Midlands is our kind of umbrella for our employer-facing offers through the CA. So hopefully that will provide our kind of strengthen our ability to engage with a wider range, a bigger volume really of employers across the region. We are also taking some kind of taking through the learning that we've gathered over the last few years of provision through Thrive at Work. We know that it is a hard programme to follow. We've always been quite proud of that because it maintains the integrity of the product, essentially. It's supposed to be, it's not supposed to be hard, but it's supposed to bring employers up to a really good standard of care for their employees. So it's not easy. It's not a tick box exercise. That said, I think there are some reflections of what we've learned about what we need to do differently. We are going to work on some kind of content revision that better suits the kind of, let's call it the post-COVID world of work, which is kind of significantly different to when Thrive was set up and designed. We are going to try a modular design to the content so that clients are better able to select content that's relevant for their employee workforce and the constituent of their how their business is run. And we're also exploring with that, the modular design will enable hopefully us to test at least a non-accreditation route. So it might be that an employer wants to take a module or two that we believe will still have an impact on their organisation and the health and well-being of their workforce, but doesn't hold them to what could be an overwhelming kind of programme of a fullness of an accreditation. So that's what we're doing with the programme currently to try and get it ready for next financial year. And just for some reassurance, we are also, just to let you know, that we are consulting with local authority colleagues that have similar programmes in this space and how we can better work together to kind of bolt on to each other's programmes and make sure our content is aligned. And final thing to say about Thrive at Work is that through a bit of the underspend that we'd accrued through the end of the MHPP programme, we have again kindly by MHPP been allowed to run some rapid pilot programmes for some wider learning that are associated to the Thrive programme. So we have one around workforce wellbeing that's directly for the employees. We normally work primarily with the employers, but we've put an offer in place that's directly with employees and very much focused on kind of cognitive behavioural changes and lifestyle changes for those employees. So that's running at the moment, and we should have some reporting from that imminently. And I can say, because that's the one I'm closest to, that's going really well. The feedback we've received so far is that it has gone really well. We have also a project that we shorthand to Black Thrive. Again, for those of you who've been around for a while with the CA and are cognizant of the Very First Mental Health Commission, we've been talking about trying to do a version of Black Thrive for quite some time. And it's just been a really difficult thing to get off the ground and figure out, you know, what constitutes a Black business, for example, are some of the questions that we've had to tackle with. We have managed to secure an offer that we, as I say, shorthand to Black Thrive internally. We are not calling it that externally. It is a workforce wellbeing offer that is culturally sensitive. So we are hoping to attract clients that can make better use of that kind of particular kind of cultural sensitivity, but it's not exclusively for that cohort. But hopefully we can draw some learning from that to think about how might we make something like this work upon kind of being able to secure some extra funding for that. And finally, we have again something that we are referring to internally, a shorthand as Thrive at Night. Because it's been pretty much modelled on an offering that is Thrive at Night down in Bristol, but we are moving away from that terminology again. We still use it internally, but essentially it's about workforce wellbeing, specifically geared towards the nighttime economy. So safety comes up as an issue there quite a lot, but also kind of mental wellbeing, and we are working with the Drinks Trust to provide the training there specifically. And I think that's about what I want to say on that one at the moment. All three of these projects, as I said, they're rapid pilots. So delivery is focused to the end of this financial year. We will be reporting as soon as we can after that, and hopefully informing the wider Thrive at Work programme. But I think I'm going to stop there, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Tatum. Very helpful and a lot to take in and consider then. And in particular, we've got to note the changes and the change requests that we've got to take forward again. Yeah. Okay. But we have here we go. Yeah. Indeed, and you talked about. Oh, I see. Yes, so that's the right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And the change.
Yeah. So just to clarify, so that change has already happened. We took it through our internal SAF process.
So you don't need
it went through that process. Went to investment panel. Went to investment board.
Okay.
And so the Thrive Into Work change has happened.
Okay.
So that
so
report's there.
So the funding's gone across.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Has there been I would guess in a way. So the Thrive programme has been such a backbone for us, and when it kicked off, I can remember that, and there's been great engagement in it, and then COVID came along, and I think that's been quite a challenge, really, and how then we get past that and reinvigorate is probably sort of where you were, it's largely around which you were talking, and perhaps also we've lost some time with contact with businesses around that plug-in and value that they've got. I quite like your non-accreditation element. I've sort of put down here a sort of taster pack, really, almost of that, to try to sort of bring people back into the value and the principles around which Thrive has always been so successful. And does it need a relaunch or anything like that?
I think we will move towards that kind of comms, because of the kind of relationship with Business Growth West Midlands allows us that opportunity, but also to be able to underline some of that kind of those innovations around a non-accreditation route and that kind of modular design. And yes, as you're saying, the interesting thing about COVID, I think, is that actually in that time it really put health and work on the agenda.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it was a bit of an opportunity, but obviously businesses were trying to figure out how to do their work when so many of their workforces weren't there. And I think that's what's instigated this thinking around redesigning some of the content so that it's more up to date, because some of the evidence that we collate, for example, in order to accredit an employer is based on the older ideas of workforces being in their place of work, which is in a hybrid world isn't fully up to date. So that's
but it's also understanding that actually the what worked in the pre-COVID world which was actually people in an environment supported and with some structure around them. And then we've loosened structures and we've changed how businesses work. And it isn't always going to be really, it's not always going to be a success for some of our people that we would want to support, because actually the value of them is the interaction and that sense of team, that sense of being part of it. So yeah, so it's a complex place, isn't it now?
And the variability of the impact as well of COVID. But there are a great many workforces that still have to go to work, and there are those that have the option of hybrid. And hybrid might work well for some, but not so much for others. So it's a really complicated
and it might
field.
be great for many too as well. So, yeah, anyone yes.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thank you so much for your and the authority's leadership in this space, because it is so important, and there's still, you know, huge political drive in this space coming from HMT, the department, DWP, as we know. And on that basis, there's a number of schemes coming through, and it's becoming quite a crowded space. And I'm just wondering, is there are you assured that you've got the grip on that crowd in terms of managing the strategic alignment, or is there something you want the board to task the advisory group to think about in order to be assured that that wider strategic group are actually working together to make sure this work is aligned? Because we know the success of this will be about yours or mine or our GP's single point of contact with one pathway to make this work rather than multiple.
Yeah, so I am quite hopeful around Workwell and that model helping that kind of triage point for those kind of that multiplicity of offers, certainly when it comes to Thrive Into Work. And as I said, this governance structure that we need to get into place around health, employment and labour market participation will help do a lot of that kind of coordination of the plethora of offers on the ground. And I do, universal support coming down the line, it does have both an employee facing and an employer facing aspect to it. I guess my request from the board though would be to be mindful of the fact that whilst there might be an employer facing point to universal support, and it could subsume some of what we do with Thrive at Work, I think there's something still really important and a clear USP around Thrive at Work that's about the preventative agenda. So it's not about workforces that are in need of health support at this point in time, but we don't want them getting to that point in time. So, you know, any advocacy around Thrive at Work as a preventative workforce wellbeing offer is very welcome.
Yeah, we know how deficient occupational health services have become over time as well. So that's really important. The second point, if I may, was around the Black Thrive work. I mean, my initial view was if we had culturally competent services, we wouldn't necessarily need Black Thrive. But if you do pursue that, how you go about doing that co-production and service design with communities that are actually going to be the beneficiaries, I think.
Yeah, I think if I may just point out that the rapid projects are kind of in different with different leads. The Black Thrive project, the culturally sensitive project, is partly being linked to the Mental Health Commission. So Rachel is leading on that, and I think really it's about waiting for the learning from that report. Is that fair to say, or is there anything?
Yeah, definitely. It's only a 6-week pilot, so it's a really short information we can extract during that pilot and where the need is and where we look at where the potential gaps have been highlighted. So be really interested, I think, to see the evaluation of that pilot to be able to assess where provision needs to be and how we can work with communities to make that work moving forward. So
and crucially, we'd need funding to be able to do anything with
Thank you so much. Just checking. So that's great. Thank you very much, and very interesting to see the change around that. So we'll. So I'm just checking the terms, which are. Is there anything that we need here? I think we're okay with all of those. I've printed on 31, and I'll take those forward as per usual. Thank you, Tatum. Thank you very much. We're only about 5 minutes late, so 7 minutes, I think, actually. So we're just move then on to the high-level deliverable update, which I think Mubashir, you're going to lead us on this one.
Yeah, so I'll try and be very, very quick.
Thanks.
This is obviously on a standing agenda
Yeah.
in terms of, well, providing updates. We've given that on paper. I'm assuming people will have read that. So I will focus specifically on 4 things, if I may, and call on colleagues as needed. So just for the board to note the HLDs for 24-25, which have been put forward, the high-level deliverables, you will note that they are quite output focused. And it may be for us to revisit how these deliverables are reported to the board going forward in the new year. Or is this something which sits with the subgroups? Is this something which sits with the performance panel that Tatum already mentioned? But just something to consider, given that this board is meant to focus more on the strategic direction of the work rather than on the very performance and output focused things. So that's something to consider going forward. But it is important for you to note what we're focusing on in the next year. So that's one thing to highlight. The other thing I was going to bring in colleagues on in the order that I'm going to say. So one is a bit of an update on the Mental Health Commission and the legacy work from Rachel, and then from on the Commonwealth Games Inclusive Communities Fund from Helen. And if we have the time, and I'm going to put her on the spot to just give a quick update on Smart City Region. So if we can. And we have had the time. So if I can go to Rachel, please.
Sure. So I'll be quick. We know that the Mental Health Commission was published in 2023, and we've been doing some work since its publication, and it have actually mobilised several initiatives through the WMCA. The first one we've been co-developing Private College, which is a new programme, primarily a skills programme really, but incorporating wraparound mental health support as part of that, but also looking at the wider whole college approach to mental well-being. That's really important. We know there's a lot of resources in schools, and the university charter that's just been put together is really comprehensive, but colleges are in that middle space. So we're really looking at how we can utilise leadership from industry experts like the Mental Health Foundation, like the Centre of Mental Health, to look at that wider whole college approach to mental well-being, and happy to bring that back at a later board date if that's helpful to look at what that co-development looks like. And we've launched the Inclusive Communities Fund, which has a real kind of push around mental wellbeing initiatives, which Helen will talk through. And then Tatum's already talked through the Black Thrive pilot. So there's been several things that have kind of happened in that space. As we move forward, we really want to, I guess, look at not just what the MCA are doing in this space, but the wider cohort of what's happening. The recommendations were multi-agency, so we want to make sure that we're looking at that as a whole. So we are proposing to convene a Mental Health Commission legacy group that will do 3 things really. So the first one is providing oversight of the recommendations, looking at where we're at, identifying the barriers and the potential challenges around delivery of the Mental Health Commission. The second being overseeing the development of a follow-on report, which will be West Midlands Health Commission a year on, to look and kind of summarise those opportunities that we have to work on a regional scale. And then the third one would be serving as a community of practice around mental wellbeing, particularly in that kind of prevention space. There isn't one currently on a regional level, so having talked to the public mental health lead, we think that is a gap and something that would really serve us well, to look at where the economies of scale opportunities are. So we're just really asking the board to think about that being a mental health legacy group that will feed into Wellbeing board moving forward, that will meet on a quarterly basis. And if there are any expressions of interest for those with kind of a keen interest around mental wellbeing to chair this group, it'd be really helpful. So thank you.
Put up the slides, please. Could you go straight to slide 3? That'll just shortcut a bit of time. So this is the Inclusive Communities Fund. That's £9 million worth of community funding from the Commonwealth Games legacy. It went across 4 parts: small grants to try and target really small community organisations that might be new to the funding landscape, medium grants for those longer, deep pieces of work that perhaps last a few months and work with a discrete cohort. Some large grants that were there to look at partnership working across the region to really start to make some major changes. And also a small works and refurbishment grant for up to £100,000 for groups where they've got, say, community centres or need kitchens, boilers. But with the money from DCMS having to be spent by March 2025, this really did force the speed by which we had to get these grants out. By mid-January, just after I met the Wellbeing Board for the last time, we'd already received £56 million worth of applications to be able to hand out £9 million worth of grants. So we had to take the decision to close the grants early because it becomes an administrative capacity issue and the ability to get decisions and money out to those groups to be able to spend it in time. So we then decided to close the grant scheme on the 4th of February. During that time, we received a further £20 million worth of applications. So we're dealing with over £71 million worth of applications and over 1,400 discrete applications from groups. Could we go on to the next slide? So what that means is, as a board, you guys were going to be there to be able to sort of steer the direction slightly as we went through this rolling programme, and that has somewhat changed. We are now, with Heart of England in the background, going through those applications to be able to make awards. So I wasn't able to give you awarding data because as soon as you print that figure, it's incorrect because yet another panel has met. But to be able to make the decision that we could close the grants, it is one thing to receive the applications, but it's another to say, are they quality applications? So we had to do a rapid look through the data and the information that we have to be able to make that decision. It also meant that there's been an issue for, not an issue, something to be discussed between Heart of England, who were the grant administrator, and United By, who were doing the community engagement exercise, because I think we can agree community engagement happened. It was brilliant, but we don't need it if the grants are no longer open. So both organisations are flipping how they look at this to how can we support capacity, how could we support those that have been awarded, and how could we support those that haven't been awarded. And since our last update, our evaluation partner is now just on board, and that is Ecoris, working with Fry Creative. Fry, both evaluators did work across the games, so have some of that intelligence to bring along. So can we go to the next slide, please? So the grant programme timeline has changed. So the applications have stopped. We're now in that awarding period, and we will be making those awards weekly, and we're hoping that no more go further than the beginning of April. Next slide, please. One of the things that was really great that we had to do is to make sure that we were capturing the governance information about the groups that are applying. The Commonwealth Games came under fire for not reaching quite into the groups that tend to be overlooked and underserved. And for us to be able to say whether that was happening or not, we had to have a way of capturing that information. But it was a volunteer form. It wasn't mandatory for those groups to fill out. So we were really overwhelmed and surprised to know that we had a 51% response rate on that. So we've actually got some really useful data. The next slide will represent 686 records, because as with anything like this, you do get those couple where I think they'd put that they had 300 people on their board where they met their beneficiaries instead of who's working for them. Next slide, please. So 30% of half have come from a global majority-led organisation. 6% came from an LGBTQIA+ organisation, and 11% came from a DDEF and or disabled-led organisation. 273 people within those organisations identified as neurodivergent. Because that was quite scattered, it became difficult to make as a percentage. But the split between organisations led by men and women was 47% each. So it's really interesting to be able to look at this, because we don't have anything previous to compare it with. This starts to become a baseline, as opposed to whether we know that if this is good or not good. Next slide, please. And then I'm so sorry about that pale orange. The beneficiaries, the top 6 beneficiaries that came out were children and young people, people with multiple disabilities or physical difficulties, older people, local residents, diverse communities, and people with mental health conditions. Just to say that language is perhaps not some of what we would use, but it's because it sits on a very long drop-down box that Heart of England have within that application process for being able to identify different types of groups. And then this is the part that I think you guys have been really waiting to see and is very, very interesting. This is the applications by geographical spread. As you can see, Birmingham, we always know that it spikes a graph once we look at a regional picture, but there's a spike and then there's some. And if we know what's happened to Birmingham during this period, I don't think it's any surprise that we've seen a huge influx from Birmingham. Towards the right of the graph, this is where groups have identified that they're working across local authority borders. So that second highest spike is that you've got 2 to 4 local authority partnerships working together. And a lot of those are our natural expected groupings at Telford and Shropshire, at Birmingham and Solihull, the Black Country, all working together. So I am really pleased to see that, because I wanted to ensure that the Inclusive Communities Fund didn't stop with local authority borders. And it was really interesting to see some of the applications come through that are working with 11+ local authority partnerships, so people working across that whole WMCA area. Next slide, please. And then our applications by theme. If you look over to the right, because you had the 3 boxes of, say, mental health, sport and physical activity, and arts, culture and creativity, we know that they don't sit in isolation from each other, so you were able to tick 1, 2 or 3. But the really great thing for this board is to see that 83% of applications were, said that they will be meeting a mental health and wellbeing output. So that is the information that I will give you for now, as we are running short on time. And at our next meeting, I'll be able to tell you more about those that have been awarded.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, very exciting. Well, I mean,
It's a bit busy at the moment.
we needed to do a sort of a miracle to try to make that spread a bit further.
We really did, but there's such interesting information in who's applied. Isn't there?
I mean, what the money's out there and doing
Yeah.
is exciting, but the nature of a time limited project on this scale means that the background information, like the slides you've just shown us, is going to be so useful for other funding streams within and without a combined authority.
Yes, thank you.
It certainly is. Because I'm sitting there thinking that, and then when that money is out. Anyone else on that?
And just picking up the point, it's about how we also learn to target support at those communities who are just underrepresented in terms of the bidding processes, which kind of varies.
Yeah, and there have been things that have come out already, like there is an issue around some governance issues for smaller organisations when they're putting in bids that makes them less successful.
What's it's highlighted through this and other funding, that there's a huge scale of issues and challenges like Helen's highlighted, and we are working together and working with United by to see how we can address that.
Any more to add to? We are at time, yeah. So can I thank everybody for attending today? Thanks you for joining us online. And it's been an interesting meeting, and we've got to be confirmed next meeting. Yes, yeah, it will be, and we'll have new membership. So I just want to say thank you all for attending today, and in previous times, if there's any change in membership, thank you to those who have been part of making our board a really useful asset. And we look forward to the next iteration. Thank you. It was